on?
Yep, we're live streaming.
Ata Mārie, morena, good morning everyone, and welcome to this open briefing, Representation Review 2024. We have some staff to support us here in the room. We also have Dale Ofsovsky, who's been an ongoing support in our last 2 or 3 representation reviews. Good to see you again, Dale, and good to have you in the room. And also, is it Ben Rosa? Yes, we have Ben Rosa in the room as well to support us. And we've got a full table here of councillors, community board members, Kim Tahiwi representing Ngā Hapua Otaki. And I think seeing as we've got such a kind of meaty discussion item today and such a full table, we'll start with the karakia. Whakatakataho ki te uru, whakatakataho ki te tonga, ki a mā, ki uta, ki mā, taratara ki tai e hia ki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei moriora. And I'll pass over to staff to get us underway. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. So today we're talking about the representation review. And this is a follow-on presentation. We already had some presentations and the report went to council in July. And there we go. So the purpose of today's session is to discuss the formal community consultation and the summary of the submissions that we have received, and also then go into a discussion around alternative options in regards to the representation arrangements that council can then consider when the report comes to council at the end of this month. And also just quickly summarise the next steps, because after council resolves its final proposal, there will be some possible follow-on steps after that. So just to summarise quickly where we are, I thought I'd bring up a map of what we currently have. So this is what is in place now and what was the basis of election for the 2022 election. So we currently have 10 councillors, and that's made up of 3 district-wide councillors, 7 general ward councillors plus the mayor. And the 7 general ward councillors are elected from 4 wards. And then we also have 5 community boards, and they are represented by 4 elected representatives each, with councillors appointed back. Cool. And then on the 30th of July, council was asked to resolve its initial proposal, and it did that in line with the Local Electoral Act. And this is the initial proposal that it resolved. And it's 1 mayor, still 10 councillors, but instead of having 3 district-wide, we would go down to 2 district-wide councillors, 7 general ward councillors, and 1 Māori ward councillor. That would be covering the entire district. And the community board arrangements would look exactly the same as they look currently, with an adjustment that the Māori ward councillor could be appointable back to the community boards. Also important to note is that the Māori ward would be named Kapiti Coast Māori ward. And then council also discussed adjusting some boundaries for the general ward, namely at Te Horo and Emerald Glen Valley Road. Also important to note is that on the 6th of August, council affirmed its decision to establish a Māori ward, which meant we continued with that trajectory, and the Māori ward will be established for the 2025 local body elections. Yeah. These are just the boundaries that I wanted to point out quickly. So there were 2 boundary alterations, as I mentioned. So one was in the north at Te Horo, and the proposal was to move that. So that's the proposed ward boundary, to move it south to Te Hapua Road. And then the other one was around Paikakariki and Paraparaumu. That's the Emerald Glen Valley Road, and that boundary would be moved back to where it used to be, eastwards, to encompass all of that into the Paikakariki Raumati ward and the Paikakariki Community Board. It's important to note that the northern one, the Te Horo one, is not compliant with the plus minus 10% fair representation rule, but council can make that decision. It just means there is an automatic referral to the Local Government Commission. In the south, that boundary alteration would be compliant, so that's okay. I've also included the numbers so you can see what is and isn't compliant. So the Otaki General Ward would be slightly out by 11.32%, and the Paikakariki Raumati General Ward would be fine. That's 8.58%. Cool. So then during the formal consultation, we had a consultation questionnaire that was formed part of the consultation documents. And we asked a couple of questions of the community. So we asked whether they would agree with keeping the number of councillors to 10, and whether they would agree with the proposed structure. So that's the 2 district-wide councillors, 7 general ward councillors, and the Māori ward councillor. We also asked if they had any other suggestions around changes, and whether they agree with the community board arrangements that we had proposed. And then we went into asking the community what they thought in relation to the proposed ward and community board boundary alterations. And we broke that out, so we had a question around Otaki Waikanai, and then the other one was around the ward boundary at Paikakariki, Raumati and Paraparaumu. And then we just rounded it off with general commentary, anything else that council should consider as part of the representation review. So the next slides are now going to be the summary of the submissions, as in the results. First off, we received 442 submissions, and we received 8 via email or letter. And there were also 10 submitters that asked to present to council. In the end, it was only 9 that actually presented. If you remember, the first presenter presented on behalf of 2 of the submissions. Most of the feedback, 37%, was received from people that indicated they lived in the Waikanai ward, and the least was received from the Otaki ward. It is important to note, though, that not everyone answered that question, so it's a little bit hard to know where the others were from. So in summary, the main feedback points, and that was included in the analysis report that we appended to the email that we sent to elected members and mana whenua representatives. In summary, the majority, about 76%, agreed that the proposed structure of having 10 councillors and the mayor, that they provide fair and effective representation. And they also, the majority, agreed with the community board arrangements, about 80%, so that's quite high. However, over half, 55%, disagreed with the council structure of having 2 district-wide, 7 general ward and 1 Māori ward councillor. It is important to note, though, we went through the number, 39% of the people that disagreed because of the Māori ward addition. So they weren't in favour of having a Māori ward councillor altogether. And in the report, we then broke that out, and the last section talks specifically about that, just so council, even though at this point there can be no alteration to that, there will be a Māori ward at the next election, just so for awareness of what our community actually thought. Then also in relation to the ward boundaries, the majority of the submitters actually support the ward boundary and community board boundary changes. And also we did a mail drop to those directly affected by the ward changes. So at Te Horo and Emerald Glen Valley Road, there was about 500 residents who either owned property there or rented property there. And of those that were directly affected by the changes, that was interesting. 67% agreed with the boundary changes at Emerald Glen and Valley Road, but the majority, about 71% at Te Horo, disagreed with the boundary changes. And I'll go more into detail later in the slides. So what did the numbers look like? I've broken it down by question. So in regards to keeping the number of councillors to 10, the majority agrees with that. In terms of the structure of having the 7 ward councillors, 2 district-wide and the Māori ward councillor, as I said, 55% disagreed. That's just in numbers. In relation to why people agreed or disagreed, those that agreed because they think it's sufficient and effective representation for the district size and for the population. There's just general satisfaction with the current representation arrangements. And also there is concern, and this is a reoccurring theme, there is concern that if the number of councillors were to increase, that would increase the costs and also make council possibly less efficient. That were some of the comments that came through. And it would cause bureaucracy. So they supported keeping it at 10 because it doesn't increase costs and it doesn't increase the bureaucracy. In terms of those who disagreed with having 10 councillors, the cost team keeps coming through. They disagreed with 10 councillors because they think that that's too expensive and it should be reduced to reduce rates. And also they disagreed with it because they think we should adjust the ward allocation at Otaki and Paikiriki where there's an underrepresentation. They think we should make changes generally and change the number of councillors. In terms of the council structure, as I mentioned before, there were 39% of those that responded that didn't agree with the council structure, and they mentioned something in relation to Māori ward, race-based representation, all in that vicinity, and that was 39%. However, of those that agreed with it, they think it's fair and effective representation. They think it's generally okay the way it is, and there is an effective mix of ward and district-wide representation. And also 2% agreed with the Māori ward inclusion in general. That's why they liked it. Of those that didn't agree with it, they just think the overall number of councillors should be reduced because of cost effectiveness. And also they didn't agree with it because of decision-making processes. They just didn't like the way that council made decisions and didn't align it with the majority view. Yeah. And then we also asked in general what would people also like to say in regards to council structure or the number of councillors. And once again, the themes that came through was around reducing costs, increasing efficiency of the council, and also there were some suggestions around changing the council structure. For example, keeping the status quo and not implementing the Māori ward, or having one councillor per ward rather than multiple ward councillors for some of the wards. Having a rural ward and combining rural areas was another suggestion, and just having a look at the underrepresentation of Otaki and Paikiriki Raumati. Those were all themes that kept coming up. And then in relation to the community boards, as I said, 80%, that's a large majority, they agreed with the proposed community board arrangements. And those that agreed with it, they mostly agreed with keeping the status quo. They think it's fair and effective the way it is. They see the value of the community boards as they are, especially ensuring local representation and championing community opinions. And also there were some calls to look into Māori representation on community boards. Those that disagreed with it they would like to see a reduction in either the number of community boards or the size of community boards, as in the elected members or the appointed members. There were once again financial comments coming through around how much is this going to cost us, our ratepayer costs going up with more community boards. They also pointed out the discrepancies of council appointments to community boards in Waikanae and Paraparaumu. And some suggested an alternative structure and memberships, such as merging existing community boards or removing the council appointments altogether. Then in relation, the next couple of slides are in relation to the ward boundary changes, and the one relating to Te Horo. So 70% agreed with the change, and that's overall, so not broken down into those that lived in specific areas. Overall, 70% agreed. And those that agreed, they agreed with it because they think that unifying areas that identify with Ōtaki, like Te Horo and Te Horo Beach, would better reflect the communities of interest. They think that it improves representation. The proposed boundaries would align with school zones, community assets, and traditional iwi boundaries. And just general comments that Te Horo more naturally aligns with Ōtaki rather than Waikanae. Then, however, on the flip side, those that disagreed, they did mention that Te Horo aligns more naturally with Waikanae rather than Ōtaki. Once again, financial concerns that they thought a change is not necessary because it costs us to make these changes. Alternative suggestions, such as moving it to the Ōtaki River instead. Just not seeing the need for change. It's working the way it is, so we should leave it where it is. Yeah, and also comments around fair and effective representation due to the size of the proposed Ōtaki ward. Sorry. Then in relation to Emerald Glen and the Emerald Glen Valley Road boundary, the changes that we proposed there, 79% agreed. That's also overall, once again. So there's general agreement with the changes and that it improves representation. The changes align with representation of the communities of interest. Emerald Glen specifically was mentioned as aligning more naturally with Paikakiriki, and they support the Paikakiriki Raumati ward the way it is. Those that disagreed, that was once again the financial concerns coming through. Why do we need to have a change when this is going to cost us? Or there is no need for a change, it's working the way it is, so maintain status quo. And then there were also comments around Raumati should be included in the Paraparaumu ward, and the Paraparaumu community board and ward boundaries should be aligned. If you remember the slide before, those ward boundaries actually don't align with the community board boundaries. Cool. So then, as I mentioned, we mailed about 500 affected residents at Te Horo and Emerald Glen. And we tried to, during the analysis, pick those out that had answered from those areas. There was a limitation to that because if people didn't tell us that they actually lived in that area, we couldn't attribute that to the affected areas. So we picked out the ones that we knew for certain they lived in those areas. And of those that we could attribute to living in those areas, Emerald Glen and Valley Road boundary changes are supported. So 67% of the residents support the boundary alignment. However, at Te Horo, we identified 21 respondents, and 15 of those didn't agree with the changes. Yeah, it was just pointed out that the numbers, there's 3 respondents that identified as living at Emerald Glen and Valley Road, so that's what I was trying to explain before. We could only attribute those 3 to actually living there because other respondents didn't answer that question or didn't identify where they lived and didn't answer the address questions. So, yeah. Yep. They were for them to fill out their address, what ward they lived in. There were all questions, but they were all voluntary. So people didn't want to disclose their names or their address or where they lived. They didn't have to. So then the last question was around general feedback. Is there anything else that you would like to say to guide councillors' thinking in regards to the representation review? And the comments that came back was for council to consider majority opinions more, restoring the democratic processes, advocacy for reduced council spending and focusing on core services and infrastructure. Councillors being more visible in the community was one comment, were some comments, sorry, not just one. And then calls for fair representation, as in all councillors should be elected and not appointed, came through. They questioned the reliability and access of information, specifically in regards to this. So some commented, I can't comment on the ward boundary changes because I don't have enough information. Or then alternative council structures and ward boundary suggestions also came through. And the last slide I have in regards to the, no, sorry, two more, in regards to the submissions and feedback we received. During the submission hearing on the 24th of September, we noted down sort of the following themes that came through. So submitters, they raised that the Te Horo boundary changes should not be considered by council and instead it should be left as it is, or consider moving the boundary north to Otaki River. That's one comment, that's a submission that came through and was also supported by other verbal submitters. And also just for council to put more weight on those submissions received from the residents directly affected. Then in relation to community boards, the submitters were generally supportive of the community boards and raised aligning community board boundaries, especially at Raumati, with the ward boundaries, that council could consider that. And even combining the Paikakiriki and Raumati community boards to strengthen their influence is also something that came through. Then alternative council structures were also mentioned, specifically around the concern that when in 1989, when council was first formed, it had more elected representatives for a smaller population. So council should consider adjusting that to grow with the population. And the last one I noted down around the Māori ward discussion. So there were some speakers in support, some speakers in opposition, and also some mentioned that we should explore a refusal to hold the referendum at the 2025 local body election. That's just a summary of the verbal submissions that we received on the 24th. And also, the next slide is mana whenua views. We received a submission letter signed by Ngā Hapu Otaki on behalf of the Art Confederation. And mana whenua confirmed that they support the name of the Māori ward as proposed, but that we should remove the Macron from Kapiti. And then they're supportive of the proposed boundary changes at Te Horo, and moving it south to Te Hapua Road would be their preferred approach.
Can we, Steph, can we just have some understanding of the background? Just some,
Yep.
Because I don't understand.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just. Kim, did you want to comment on that? Or do you want me to speak to it? Because I'd be. Thank you.
So I'm probably not the expert on this, just saying. But there has long been some discussion about whether Kapiti actually does have a tohu toa over it. And I think the understanding is, from our perspective, it doesn't. And that's why we've suggested that But if you really wanted to understand, I think we should probably get someone here who does have some expertise as to why. But I know that discussion has always been a contentious thing that when we look through documents, and that there is a discussion around, does it actually have a tohu toa? Because there's two different ideas about why it should and why it shouldn't. But we do have some Māori language experts that could probably articulate that way better than I could. And that might be something that you might invite them in and have a listen to that.
I don't think the wider discussion is a discussion for right now, but interesting to have this as a starting point for that discussion in the middle of slides around a representation review. But we'll look forward to that discussion at a future time, I guess.
So I'll continue for now, and then we can come back to this. It is on a future slide as well. So just to summarise, what do the results mean? There is a support for the number of councillors, a support for the proposed community board arrangements. There's also support for the boundary alterations at Emerald Glen and Valley Road. But there are some considerations for councillors to consider today, and that's around the council structure, whether they'd like to reconsider that. There are a few points that we would have to raise if that was a consideration council wanted to open up for discussion today. Definitely around the Māori board name, whether the Macron should be removed, and the boundary at Te Horo, whether that should be amended for the final proposal. And I just wanted to note here that any amendments to the initial proposal that council want to consider should be in response to submission that was received during the formal community consultation. So it's in line with the Local Electoral Act.
Right, is that the end of the presentation?
So the next couple of slides hopefully will help councillors through those discussions. So I would expect that there will be questions with the next couple of slides, because I have provided numbers for the boundary alterations at Te Horo, so you can discuss what the different options
go
are.
on then.
Yes.
Great.
So
Yep.
is that all right?
Yep.
Okay. So the first is the name of the Māori ward. So the options are either have the name as in the proposal with the Macron, Kapiti Coast Māori ward, or the name suggested by Mana Whenua, Kapiti Coast Māori ward without the Macron. The Macron is the only change that has been suggested. And then
How do we want to approach this? Do we want to discuss each one of these as we work through them, or
When I think it's an appropriate time to stop, I'll stop.
perfect.
Thanks.
Okay.
Councillor Halliday? Yeah.
And then, so that's one discussion. And then the second discussion is around the Te Horo, the ward boundary at Te Horo. So there are, as we see it, currently 3 options. Either to go with the proposal, that's the middle one, and leave it to go south to Te Hapua Road, as in not leave it, sorry, move it south to Te Hapua Road. Then leave the boundary as is, where it is currently going down School Road and is it, I think I noted it down, and Te Horo Beach Road, is that right?
Yeah.
Or to move it now north to Otaki River. It's important to note that leaving the boundary as is, and I will have slides later on, is compliant with the plus minus 10% rule, and it's the preference of the community directly affected. The proposal is not compliant with the plus minus 10% rule, and it's the preference of the whole community, as in the submitters as a whole. They supported it, and it aligns more closely with Mana Whenua boundaries, so the iwi, the traditional iwi boundaries. And then the last option is also non-compliant with the plus minus 10% rule, but it means that the community is no longer split, and submissions received, the comments have been around greater access to funding for a reason to move it north to Otaki. So as you can see on this slide, our intent was to leave the council structure as is because we weren't able in the submissions to identify another alternative structure that just overwhelmingly came through, presented to you. And working up all the possible options is pretty impossible because there are so many. So we have left that for now, unless you would like to have that discussion. Whereas these two discussions, they have clear options that we can present to you.
Okay, Steffi, should we take it a slide at a time?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to start with the second one, seeing as that's the last one you talked about.
Yep.
So, so when you say leave boundary as is, do you mean as it is in the current structure or as proposed in the...
As it is in the current structure. So,
So not what we went out
Yep.
within our proposal.
yes. Yep.
Revert back to the current structure.
Yes, yeah, it is a little bit complex. But if we can all agree, leave as is means what it is currently,
With
and
Te Horo in the Waikanae.
half in Waikanae and half in Otaki.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, yeah. For everyone's clarity, I think that would be the best way forward.
Okay, we'll have a discussion about that. Bearing in mind, this isn't the day when we make the decision. Finding more information, kind of. But on the 31st of October, we need a preferred option to come to the table, or will we have
Yeah.
various
So,
options come to the table?
we need to be able to put a recommended option into the report. But also, if there were any other options that you wanted to discuss, these are the options that will be coming in the report for council to consider on the 31st. If there's anything else, you would have to provide us with some guidance today and let us know what we need to work up. And then we can have a discussion around what's actually possible at this point to work up.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. I'll go to Councillor Warwick.
Are we just talking about the boundary, not the Macron at this point? Okay.
Yes.
So in the slide it says greater access to funding.
Mhm.
Is that a comment from the submissions? So it's around the funding they got from the Waikanae Community Board, not the funding potential when they're involved with Otaki, that's a perspective. It's not actually a fact, isn't it?
I don't think I can answer that. I can't answer what the submitter actually meant by that, but the comments
in-
were around having greater access to funding. Or submitters. Submitters.
I know, but when going with Otaki, we have a lot more access to growth funds and stuff at this point in time. So that's kind of it's a perspective, not
Yes,
a
yep.
fact.
It's a perspective.
Yeah. So what we're considering today is the perspective of the community.
Yeah.
So we won't kind of argue against them in their absence or anything like that. Just taking their comments on board in order to kind of find a way forward with how we want to approach the council report. Mr. Butler.
Kia ora. Just a quick question, Steffi. What was the total number of properties affected by that boundary change? Just trying to get a feeling of 21, how much of a percentage is that? Like, is it significant, or are we talking about people who are pretty much meh?
I don't have that number on hand. I know it's about 501 properties, but that's both boundaries. And I know the majority was at Te Horo because there is not as many properties at the Emerald Glen.
Yep.
I think if you can hold on, we can
Oh,
calculate
yeah,
it quickly.
it's not a burning question.
Yeah,
I was
we've
just trying
got
to work out whether 21 is significant or not. But if it is significant, then let's just leave it as is. It makes life a little bit easier for everyone, would be my thoughts. But I'm not trying to build my realm and say that we should definitely have Te Horo. There's some negative aspects as well, some strange people there.
So you're definitely not trying to build your realm if you're saying leave it as is. Yeah. Sorry, can you turn your microphone on? I'm just trying to get it clear what your perspective is, because it's quite important as the
yeah,
board chair.
So if the if that sort of 21 and therefore the 71% don't support the boundary change, if that's a decent enough response from the affected properties, I'm happy as board chair, for the Otaki board chair, to actually go with that majority. It's just not worth the issues and trying to change things back and forth all the time. If they don't want to be part of Otaki, then just leave it.
Okay.
Keep it as is.
That's a useful perspective. Kim?
Kia ora. So we would not support moving it to the Otaki River, purely because Ngāti Huia sits on the south border of the Otaki River, and they have all their lands on the south of the Otaki River. So when we went to this, we looked at the iwi boundaries and where the boundaries are and Te Hapua, and so we considered all that, and we considered the cost, and so that's why we were happy with where Te Hapua sat. But also, to Cam's point, moving the boundary all the time because a couple of households want it to be moved is one, costly, and it just makes no sense. Like, and I'm going to play the lifer card here. So my family's lived in that town for 9 generations. So I've been told, and Te Horo has always been part of Otaki for that long. So to just move it and then have another lot of people move in and go, actually, we want to go back to Otaki, just makes no sense to be going here, there and everywhere. So we would absolutely oppose it going to the Otaki Awa. And if we were even going to consider it, and I see on your proposal that it says it's probably not really feasible anyway, we would actually have to give all our Ngāti Huia whānau the opportunity to comment, because we commented on what was on the table. Should that position change, I think you're going to get a lot more people who will be affected by that boundary commenting. And there's no way Ngāti Huia or Ngā Hapa are going to let that boundary go to the Otaki River. So that's, yeah. But what is the feasibility of actually, what would be the next steps? And
So in terms of the feasibility of moving it to Otaki River, I just need to quickly, that's the population data, moving it to Otaki River. And as you can see, I said before that it's non-compliant. It's actually quite significantly non-compliant with
so it's
the
not
FIR.
really even an option. No. Cool.
Council can make the decision, but it would have to be referred to the local government commission.
Who would say no? So it would be a waste of time,
Great.
in my view.
Good to hear.
So to be clear, the people you're representing sitting here at the table today are supporting keeping it as the,
Te Hapua, the one
Pink
that was
line.
proposed.
yeah.
So as per our letter, we supported Te Hapua because it is closer to the iwi boundary, and historically that whole area has been part of Otaki, and that's why we supported Te Hapua. But I know there's also talk about having it status quo. So I think our letter did say Te Hapua. So that was the one that was proposed in the consultation.
So it's actually changing the boundary that you were supporting. I'm sorry, I can't
Yes,
remember what the letter
changing the
said.
boundary to
So
Te
you're
Hapua.
not supporting the status quo,
No.
what it is at the moment.
No, we were
You're supporting
the
the change
to Te
in the
Hapua.
boundary to bring Te Horo into Otaki.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Halliday.
Yeah, thank you. Just two quick questions. Can you also tell me the targeted response for the Te Horo residents? How many responses did you get back for that?
The ones that we could attribute to coming from there, 21.
21. Okay, cool. And just clarifying that the pink line is the current status quo.
That's correct.
Yep. Okay.
So
And
the
I quite-
pink line is the current boundary line. The blue line is moving it south to Te Hapua, and the orange is Otaki River.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to remind that, you know, we did a representational review last Friday, and this is a streamlined process. I'm, in this particular instance, quite happy for the status quo to remain. I certainly had entertained the thought of bringing it back to where it was before. But I do take on, which is potentially, well, I was waiting to see what came back from the community, and generally the community doesn't support that, but iwi does. I think I agree with Pat that if this goes back up to the commission, that they'll just push it back to where it was before, because it's too close to the last representational review. So I'm picking, and it's in our best interest just to leave it as it is, and taking on board potentially the numbers change with the Māori ward. We'll have a better idea of that on the other side of the equation, is that the concerns of iwi could perhaps be more constructively addressed at the next representational review as such, because I don't think we're going to get any change out of the commission as such. So it would be, for us to push back to the other one, the previous one, will be a bit of a protest vote, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but will more than likely, I can't see it changing the mind of the commission though.
Mr. Mansell.
Thank you. Through the chair. You can get a statistic to prove anything, can't you? But I think the big one is that 71% of the people who identify with living in Te Horo area want to stay where they are, and for whatever reason. And during the previous representation review, we had some very firm opinions from people who lived up near the boundary that said that they identified as Waikanae. We've probably had equally firm opinions saying they identify with Otaki. I use my supermarket decision as when you turn out of your driveway, do you go left or right to the supermarket? And I would have thought Te Horo would naturally go right, but that's not for me to decide. I think the big decision here is what will the Electoral Commission do to us, and I think they will say no change, so why bother even upsetting them? If we think about the funding, we've had a huge amount of funding poured into the Te Horo area via the Waikanae Community Board, and I think people have... Huh? Well, it's more than Otaki ever gave them, isn't it? So follow the money. It would be more than 50k, but let's not get caught up in semantics. Yeah, so I think the decision is, do we want to bother the Electoral Commission? Because that's the only thing we'd be doing, and they'd more than likely slap us down.
Can I just add something
Sure.
there? So once council, and there will be a last slide around next steps, maybe I can quickly go to that.
Sure.
Once council passes its final proposal on the 31st, it will notify that proposal, and unless the proposal is exactly the initial proposal, then no, that's not true. No, is it true? I will finish my thought and then get Dale to jump in. Then once it passes its final proposal, it must then notify it. And once it notifies it, there will be then a period where the community can object to that. And if the community objects, if there's an objection received, it will go to the Local Government Commission anyway. So there is that tiny little fish hook that when you say let's not bother the commission, they may have to make a determination anyway. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. Is that clear? Yeah. So it is still likely that we will end up there.
Okay, is that clear? Yeah. Councillor Warwick?
Oh, I actually support Kim, and I'm not sure at the last representation review whether the community wanted this boundary change, but it was put upon them. Hey? So it wasn't done by the community, it was done to the community at the last representation review. And if we do the status quo for this one, I think there needs to be a whole lot more work well before the next one, working with Hapu and Iwi and the community about what they actually want, where they actually go, who they align with, because that is traditionally our boundary, and I just don't believe it was done in really with the will of the community. It was done to them, and you know, swapping and changing without a whole lot of work beforehand is maybe not going to achieve what we want, but we do have 3 years till the next one. Is that we have one in 28? Is that correct?
It will depend on the outcome of the poll around the Māori ward. So at the next election, we'll have to hold a poll around the Māori ward under the legislation that's just changed.
So likely we will, and then we will have a lot more backing to say, hey, hold on, this was done to us 3 years ago, and we don't want it to be done to us. Or maybe we do. I don't know. I just support Kim. I don't think the boundary change was something the community wanted.
Yeah, sitting on a Zoom call, having a robust conversation with the Local Government Commission, I can assure you that we expressed the view that this was something that hadn't been really run by the community at the time, and that communities of interest were more important than percentages. But that was the argument. The percentages were what won the day then, and usually win the day with the Local Government Commission, actually. Councillor Pravanov.
Yeah, thank you. So I suppose one of the councillors who sat around the council table when the previous representation review was made. So basically, that was done because there was a plus or minus discrepancy to the point with 26% in Waikanae. At the end of all the I suppose, the consultation, this council, well not this council, the previous council dropped it back to 23%. That automatically meant it was going to go to the Electoral Commission. So in terms of saying, so basically what I'm saying here is that this council didn't make a decision that was going to be acceptable, so it automatically had to go back to the Commission. And listening through that Zoom process that Janet talks about, there was a lot of conversation, a lot of argument for moving the boundary further south because of where the iwi boundaries were. The Commission did not accept that. They did not accept that as a reason to move the boundary south. So what I'm saying is that if it does go back to the Electoral Commission, they're probably going to use exactly the same reasoning because there's been nothing that has changed substantially between then and now. So I think that keeping the status quo is the best option at this point in time. Depending on the outcome of the referendum, we're in a far better position to actually make decisions further down the line rather than changing them now in a very short period of time and then having to do it again later if depending on what happens. So that's my thoughts on everything. Thank you.
Shall I go to Nigel?
Yeah, I will actually. Thanks, Cam. And Nigel.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, just a couple of points. One is I agree with Kim, but then I'm not sure that it's part of anybody's discussion to take the boundary north to Otaki River, more around the Te Hapua Road. At the moment, we have a situation where if you're on one side of a road, you're in Waikanae, and if you're on the other side of the road, you're in Otaki. And so I thought there was an opportunity just to tidy that up. And the other point, just to Shelley, about it having been done to them, that was the case for Otaki, of course, because Otaki actually wanted to stay in Horowhenua back, I think it was, I forget what year it was, but Sir Brian Elwood at the time was the commissioner, and they compulsorily put Otaki into Kapiti. So sometimes these things do happen to them. But,
And we're very happy to have them.
And we've been thrilled ever since. Not sure how thrilled Otaki's been. At different times, they've wanted to go back north again. So, unless there's they want to secede from the Republic, I don't think that's going to change either. But yeah, just tidying up, it just seems incongruous that you have, a division in an actual street. That makes no sense to me. So I think there's an opportunity to tidy that up. And sorry, one other thing, just when they were talking about the Macron, I wasn't quite sure why.
So
Iwi didn't
before
want
you
the
go on with the
Macron.
Macron, I'll just give everybody an update about that. I've just
Yeah.
had a little conversation with the Chief Executive. I've just moved on to this so that I could have a wee think about what to do about that landing on the table today. And I think we actually need more information and we need a separate discussion around that. So we'll schedule a separate time for that discussion so that we can have all the information and all the perspectives in front of us and make a considered kind of have a more informed discussion rather than trying to speculate today. So we're going to park that discussion. So we won't talk about the Macron today. We're going to do that another time.
Because they're always really high-level, deeply philosophical discussions. The Macron.
There are a few things to take into consideration, and I think the depth of feeling amongst iwi is one of those considerations. So we'll go to. Is that you? Did you have anything more to say about the boundary change before I move on, Nigel?
No, other than personally, I'm thrilled to have Te Horo as part of Waikanae in a political sense. In a cultural sense, of course, people are free to go wherever they like. And to Richard's point, people at supermarket, do you go right? In this case, if you go right to Waikanae, that's correct. And if you go wrong, you head in the other direction.
Okay, we'll move on. Cam?
We'll go to
Nigel
first
as
names,
you meaning
that turn left, not necessarily wrong. Just two other minor points. The actual proposed boundary wasn't Te Hapua Road. It's literally a straight line rather than actually following Te Hapua Road. Is that correct? So we won't have the situation of one house on one side is Waikanae. I thought it was slightly south of Te Hapua Road.
I will defer that to Ben and Dale, if that's all right.
Ben and Dale, we need you. Hang on, wait for the red light. There it is.
Gotcha. That boundary there will follow where the mesh blocks are. Mesh block boundaries don't always follow roads, and they don't quite there. When they do follow roads, they often do go through the middle of the road. I think there is another slide that shows more precisely where that boundary is. Might be a good one to look at. Yeah.
So the broken up line is the current
School road,
boundary, and then the full straight line, that's Te Hapua Road, the new boundary that was in the proposal.
That's not the road. That's south of Te Hapua. I can see that. No, okay.
So the current boundary goes down the middle of the road. The proposed boundary
It's mesh blocks.
doesn't.
It's great getting the glasses on.
Can't see any roads on the proposed boundary.
And no, it's just south of Te Hapua Road, so you can see that it's not down Te Hapua Road. Can you... Oh, where's my... Here is Te Hapua Road.
Where?
Sorry, it's not very steady.
Yeah, so it is south. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that gets rid of the what Nigel was worried about with it being
Right.
down the road again.
So we've addressed that problem with the proposed boundary change.
Cool. And second other little point, at the local government conference, I actually spoke to the local government commission because they had people there, and they were very, very definite that to actually change the boundary, they would need to see very definite feedback from the residents that they wanted to be part of the Otaki ward, and so that would be one of the things that they would take into account if they were looking at accepting the change that was proposed. Like Simon and I had quite a long chat with them, and that was the thing they kept on going back to, was you'd need a very definite mandate from the residents to change.
That's really useful. Thank you, Cam. Liz.
Right. Okay, so as a resident of Te Horo Beach Road, right on the boundary, and
Which boundary?
the Waikanae Otaki
I know.
boundary, the current one. And also, you know, I'm a member of the committee for the Friends of Te Horo Beach. And I just want to talk about that aspect. So Friends of Te Horo Beach is a community group that spans from Te Hapua Road up to Otaki River for all residents in that area. And we currently have the advantage whereby we can apply for funding from 2 community boards for local projects. I don't think this is a burning issue for people in Te Horo. We make a community irrespective of electoral boundaries. We do things as a community. We fundraise for our community, for our defibrillator and our, you know, planting trees and whatever else. And that has nothing to do with electoral boundaries. And as I say, we can choose where we obtain our funding and support from within that area. So to me, this is not a die in the ditch issue, and I think we need to just move on and just leave it as it is for now. Thank you.
Thank you for that perspective. I think we're moving on anyway because I'm not seeing any more lights. So I'll give my perspective just to finish up. I think that's a really good point that electoral boundaries don't communities make. It's yeah. So and my other thought is, having sat in that other discussion with the Local Government Commission, if we go to them with the proposed Otaki Waikanae ward boundary change with the feedback that we've heard today, our chances are slim of actually, extremely slim of actually achieving the change. And it would take quite a lot of resource from the Local Government Commission perspective and also from our perspective to continue, I was going to say flogging that horse, but that might be going a bit far, to continue that discussion. So I would be, I've also heard around the table that there's a commitment to having another look at that in the next round, which even if the referendum succeeds, won't be too far down the track, and then we can go with more evidence, more feedback, and a better case to make the change. So I'm just checking whether there's a level of comfort around the table. It's going to be useful to staff if they feel they know that we feel comfortable with that being the preferred option on the 30th. Bearing in mind, as happened previously, we can change our mind on a dime on the day and create a new community board even if we want to. So I think we'll leave that discussion there and move on to the next proposed change. So we're going to deal with the Macron later. We're going with the status quo for now. Staff have heard that we want to have another look at this next time. And we'll move on to the next one, which I think is going to be a bit simpler than this one. This was probably our biggest discussion today. Yep.
So the next discussion, I don't have any slides for that. That would be around your comfort level with keeping the proposed council structure as it is in the proposal and not looking at that again. So that's up for discussion. There was over half of the people didn't support the current structure. But once again, 39% didn't support it because of the Māori ward.
Could we have the slide up again around that?
Absolutely.
So my question was, and I can't remember whether it was answered in the slides, how many of the 55% said because of a Māori ward?
39 of the 55. I've got the numbers somewhere. No, it was
Because actually they were answering a question that we weren't asking.
So
what we're trying to decide here is not whether to have a Māori ward or not.
That's correct.
It's whether we want to, putting that to one side, retain the structure.
Yes. Yes.
That's proposed.
Yeah, and the proposed structure is to have 2 district-wide councillors, 7 general ward councillors, 1 Māori ward, and the general ward councillors would be 1 for the Otaki general ward, 2 for the Waikanae general ward, 3 for the Paraparaumu general ward, and 1 for Paikakiriki Raumati.
So what I would like to see in the report is a bar graph with yes, no for reasons around the structure, and no to a Māori ward. So we can have a visual representation of that, because at the moment what we're seeing is a visual representation that over half of people say no.
Yep.
And that's what a lot of people kind of hook onto.
Yep.
With simple majority decision-making narrative that's going around.
Yep.
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 So the question that was asked.
Sorry,
is
I
that's-
haven't called for questions yet. So is that going to be okay to have that in the report? And then the next question is, so if you do the maths, that means we have 45, so we have 39 versus...
So it's 39% of the 55.
39%
But
of
we will
55 or
work-
39% of 100? 39% out of the 55% or 39% of the 55%?
39 of the 55%, and Sarah's just whispering in my ear, that's about 16% overall. My
So
math's not quite as quick, sorry.
Yeah, so you take away 16% from the no, and what do you end up with? So I'd quite like to have that information today to base our decision on. Can somebody do some quick maths for us? And now go to Jocelyn.
Oh, right, okay. Okay.
Yeah, thank
Okay,
you.
so Sarah has
Sorry.
done the quick math in her brain. So it's 45% that are supportive of the council structure, 16% that are not supportive of it, and the remaining, what?
39.
39% are no, because of the Māori ward.
Okay,
Yep.
so it's 39% of 100, not 39% of 55%. Yeah, gotcha. That's easy. Yeah, so that means that
it's
there's a clear majority.
Yeah, I think it's 170 something, maybe 171 actual respondents.
Yeah,
who
so we still don't have a majority saying yes.
No.
But,
No.
but out of those 3 groups,
Yep.
the largest group are the yes group.
Yes, yes, yeah.
So that we need to find a way to communicate that clearly and visually.
Yep.
And I think it's to do with the level of interest in the conversation around Māori wards, that there was an opportunity to express that point of view again, even if it wasn't directly answering the question that we wanted answered.
Yes.
Okay, Jocelyn, I'll go to you now. Sorry for the
thank
delay.
you. So the question, so up there is the exact question that was in the survey, is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
So I suppose if I can just make a comment, to me, there's actually 3 components to that. And when you actually have got to answer a yes or a no, it's actually, you can't do it. That is, to me, if I can suggest, is a learning.
Thank you for that suggestion.
So I don't know
Do you
how
have
you
anything
actually
further to add?
tease it out so you can get the information that you want. But I suspect that question has, even if you separate out those percentages, if the question had been asked a different way, you probably would have got a different set of percentages.
Yeah, I do think there was a bit of a problem with the wording of the question, because it does kind of ask if you want a Māori ward councillor.
Well, even, so some people have talked about more less ward councillors and district-wide size. Well, there's a number of components in there.
Yeah. Councillor Kirby? Lawrence?
I was just confirming, and I think Sarah's just confirmed it for me. So if you remove the 39%, it means a majority have said yes to the current structure.
Yes. Yeah. Liz?
Look, I agree that's a really badly worded question, and I think we need to say that in the report, that in retrospect we feel that the answer to this question is clouded because it wasn't clear enough what people were responding to. So I think we should be upfront and say that.
Yep. We did include in all of our frequently asked questions on the website and even underneath the question that the Māori ward component is not part of this question.
Yeah,
However,
but when people are flicking through a questionnaire, they just go yes, no,
Yeah.
yes, no, yes, no.
Yeah, I
They're
mean,
not going to refer back to the fine print. So
Yeah, I think it would have been easy. Do you agree with the proposed structure, which includes?
or just given that we are instituting a Maori ward, how do you, how?
I mean, the question means what it's meant to mean, right? But so I don't think we need to fall on swords, but I think we do need to identify that there was some level of misunderstanding with the
Yeah.
way the question was
But
worded.
I think we should put that in the report, that because of the way it was worded, there
So
was some
the chief executive's
misunderstanding.
going to respond now.
I'm just going to reaffirm this was not about a Māori ward. You know, so it's about the rep review. Council decided on the Māori ward, so we can critique the questions, but it's been done.
Yeah.
And I also think that under usual circumstances, that question probably would have been answered as we intended. But it's a little bit like for the 5 years where even through every consultation we had, whether it was a representation review or whether it was a park management plan, we had answers that said build a dam. You know, people will use an opportunity to make their point. And I think that a percentage of those people perfectly understood what this question was, but they were using it to make a point, which is part of what happens in consultation. I'm not criticising that approach, because if you feel strongly about that, about something, you do want to find opportunities to make that point. So, but we will find wording in the report about the way this question was asked and ways to communicate how we got some of the answers that we got. So that's a really good point. I'm just checking Nigel hasn't got his hand up because we haven't got any lights. He does indeed. You're up, Nigel.
Okay. Yeah, just a couple of points on this. That I think it's important to understand what these things are. This is a survey. It's you do all sorts of interesting things with percentages. At best, this is designed to give the decision makers a steer. It's not a referendum. N in this case is statistically too low to draw any conclusions from it. So I think there's a real danger. Councils all over the country do it. If the stats come back and confirm the prevailing viewpoint, you use them, and if it doesn't, you send them away. They're only ever best used as a steer, and that's what we should be doing. I agree with Darren. I think, and the point you just made, Janet, you could be asking about ice cream, and people will put something about tractors if that's what they're really interested in, and that was the case here. Some people were going to have their say about a Maori ward, regardless of what the questions were. Could have been about anything. So. Being one of those people that supported a dam for a long time.
As I said, I'm not criticising that approach at all.
And still do, by the way. Yeah, so just the one thing for me, if I was throwing anything into the mix, and this is in no way a slight on the current district-wide councillors, but I would have all ward councillors. But I don't know that that's part of what's going to be proposed, and I don't know, what the general feeling on that would be. And of course, the Maori ward would be one of those. So you would effectively have 10 ward councillors.
I think the point that Kim raised, if you don't mind me answering that earlier, about the fact that there was an option there that hadn't been on the table for her people to consider.
Yeah.
Wards only isn't something that's been on the table for people to consider, but it keeps coming up. So let's put that on our list to have a serious look at next time. And we've got some really strong submissions around that too. So let's tuck them away for use next time would be my suggestion. And I'm really looking forward to yet another representation review.
Yeah, and I
They're
don't think
getting
it's a
quite
kick
fun,
in the,
aren't they?
yeah. I don't think it's kicking the can down the road, but the point that Shelley
It is a
made
little bit.
earlier, I mean, the point that Shelley made earlier is some of these things are reasonably complex. Where the fact that we're introducing a Maori ward is already one level of complexity that I'm not sure you want to add too many this time round. But to Shelley's point, for the future, the 3 years comes around really fast, but it provides an opportunity, given that the government's just announced 3,500 new houses to come into Kapiti, quite a few of which will be here by the next election. There will be significant population shifts about where those are going to be and how that plays into the plus or minus 10. So I'm with Shelley on that. I think we have an opportunity to have a really good think about where we go in the future and what structure we might have. I think anything is likely just to be a bit rushed now.
Yeah.
So what it's worth.
Thank you. I think that's a really good point. So I'm not seeing any more. So what else do we need to discuss today? I think we're kind of saying we're comfortable with retaining the proposed structure, which was 7 ward councillors, 2 district-wide and 1 Māori ward, but we've given some requests around how we communicate that and how we present that in terms of the feedback that we got. Is there anything else? The Emerald Glen, we're all happy, hunky-dory with that?
So I didn't bring that up on the slides because the support from
Just
the
seems-
community overall. Plus,
I will for once say no-brainer. Not a phrase I use very often.
And when council amends its proposal for the final proposal, it needs to do that in line with submissions received. So there were no submission. There were submissions around keeping the status quo, but the majority supports the proposed changes. So I would.
Right. Well, let's rattle
Throw
on
that
through
in
any
there.
slides. Jocelyn?
So just going back to how many submissions were there for the Emerald Glen change?
So that we could attribute 3 that we know for sure they live in the affected area. However, of the 442 submissions overall, and about 79%, I think it was 79, I can go through it again, supported it overall.
Yeah, I'm just a little bit cautious in terms of you actually are only considering those residents from Emerald Glen, because that was 3 submissions. I don't know what percentage it was, but plus or minus 3 submitters, that can't be outside the plus or minus 3%. So really, to me, it's a no result. That's my view. So you can, as someone else said, you can do whatever you want to do with stats. Yeah. So I'm just making that point of caution.
Yep.
Yeah, the percentage isn't that far outside. I
Well,
don't
when
even
it's
know
based
why they
on
did it in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your...
So
I'm
I
not quite
suppose in
understanding
terms
what
of-
it is you're wanting to happen.
Well, I suppose what I'm saying is that overall, that 79% is for that change, but when that was considered in terms of Te Horo, you looked at the residents, and here there've been only 3 respondents, but it's now saying that 67% are agreeing with that change. But the percentage of those people is actually of the actual residents who are going to be affected, it's actually a very, very small of a whole
But
percentage.
they feel very strongly about it.
Yeah,
Jocelyn.
well, maybe they do. Maybe they do. I'm just.
I think I'll go to Sophie to comment on that.
The point is, other people never actually responded.
All right. Yeah, no doubt Sophie's got some things to add, but I've just got a question. So if we gave those residents a choice basically between Paikakariki or Paraparaumu, did we also give them the choice of being part of Raumati? Excuse me.
In terms of the ward, the question was whether whether it's Paikakiriki Raumati Ward or Paraparaumu Ward. And in terms of the community board, no, it was just the Paikakiriki community board in the proposal. We basically asked, do you agree with the proposed boundary changes? And there were no comments that came through around aligning with Raumati. It was more around Raumati aligning with Paraparaumu.
Did they know, though, that that was an option, a possibility? I suppose is the question. They may not have commented on something they didn't know could exist.
So during the consultation, you consult on the proposal.
We did discuss that when we met with Kelsey. We talked about those possibilities, but yeah, that's okay.
Sophie?
Yeah, I think probably one of the reasons why as Steffi said, the proposal was, and it had to be, but black and white in terms of including the Emerald Glen properties within the Paikakiriki Community Board constituency, was just because, as Janet mentioned, there were some quite strong views expressed at numerous community board meetings about the fact that the residents feel like they want to be back with the Paikakiriki Community Board, and then the inclusion of them in the ward was mainly to enable that community board participation, to be honest. And so we heard that, like, I'm talking at like 4 or 5 different meetings from, I think at one meeting there were maybe 6 or so residents from the area that would be moved back under this proposal, who actually all came and expressed the fact that they felt very strongly about this. So I think it is, as the Mayor said, it seems like quite an obvious shift to make based on that feedback, and also the fact that they very much feel like Paikakiriki is their community of interest.
They feel like the rural hinterland of Paikakiriki. The old Paikakiriki school is up there, for those of you who don't know. And kids used to ride 4 on the back of a horse from the village in Paikakiriki up to the school, which is up in Emerald Glen. You can see it from the road down the driveway. It's a little... Anyway, that's an aside. I think we'll move on with the rest of the slides now, if that's okay. I think we've got a steer on that.
So the other slides that I had in there, if you're interested, were around the percentages. So if you were to make no boundary changes at Te Horo, it would all be compliant, just so you've seen the slide. Then moving it to Otaki River is non-compliant, as I showed before. And these are the detailed slides. And that's the last slide that I have, and that's around next steps. So on the 31st of October, we'll bring a report to Council to consider and resolve its final proposal. And just to reiterate again, if any amendments are to be made, it should be in response to the submissions received during the formal consultation, just so we're in line with the Local Electoral Act. And then once Council has resolved its final proposal, we will publicly notify it by the 3rd of November. It will realistically be the 1st, because that's the Friday, not the Sunday. And then that will kick off a period where the community can object to the final proposal. And that will close on the 6th of December. If Council on the 31st made a decision around the Te Horo boundary that wasn't compliant, then it would be automatically referred to the Local Government Commission. If that proposal is compliant, then we'll have to wait and see if there are any objections received. And if objections are received, we'll have to pass it on to the Local Government Commission by the 20th of December. And they have tentatively penciled in a hearing date of the 6th of March for us, just for diary management purposes. They were very clear. And so that they've penciled it in for all of the councils, so not just for us. And so after the 6th of March, we would expect a determination by the 10th of April. And that would then determine the basis of election for the next election to be held in October 2025.
Thank you. Are there any final questions? Do you have everything you need from us today? Bede?
There was the submissions about the Raumati Community Board and its potential change. Is that in discussion, or that's something that's not going to be pursued anyway, so no point talking about?
It wasn't part of the proposal, and there were comments received, hence why I mentioned it today, but there's no majority comments around that, so it would be up to Council to consider this, but it's not a majority comment. It's a
I
few
suppose I'm just worried
comments
about
received.
something going to a further stage where it suddenly is out of my hands and people make a decision and I haven't had a chance to discuss
I don't think
it.
that's going any further this time.
All right. As long as that's the case, yeah, I just would hate to lose that chance, but if it's not worth talking about, then that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Good to have that. Good to have that clarified. No surprises around here. Jocelyn?
Yeah, thank you. So, in your presentation, Steffi, you talked about ward councillor representation on community boards, and that there were submissions on, I suppose, the anomalies between Waikanae and Paparamo Raumati, I think it was, Paparamo. So, is that going to, well, I would actually like that addressed at the meeting on the 31st as well. So to me, and I think as Dale has also mentioned previously, is there's absolutely no reason why 2 ward councillors cannot sit on the Waikanae Community Board, be appointed to the Waikanae Community Board. Is there any reason why that has not been brought forward?
So, and as part of the proposal, and that's what's up on the slide, we proposed that we would retain 5 community boards as they are now, with 4 elected representatives each, and then the appointments back to the community board would be 1 councillor back to the Otaki Community Board, and it can either be the Otaki General Ward or the Māori Ward councillor, and council can decide that in the new triennium. And then for Waikanae, it would be 1 councillor, and it can either be a general ward councillor or the Māori Ward councillor. For Paraparaumu, it would be 2, and then it's either Māori Ward and the general ward, or 2 general wards, or whatever council decides in the new triennium. And for Paikakiriki Raumati, it would be 1, and so that's either the Māori Ward or the general ward. That was the proposal. And submissions, 80% agree with the proposed community board structure as it's been put into the initial proposal. So that's the community voice that's come back on that.
So it's saying that the number of councillors, whether they are Māori Ward or whether they are ward councillors, would stay the same.
The number, yes, would stay the same. Yeah.
Saying that, specifically for Waikanae, there were submissions on the Waikanae ward. Were there any people saying that there should not be 2?
I can't confirm that with absolute certainty, but what I do know is that some people, and that's the 20%, that didn't agree, there were comments in that 20% around councillor appointments to community boards. But that ranged from there should be no appointments to community boards, no councillor appointments, all the way to we should address the discrepancies, and that's what you're talking about. So it was both sides.
So this council has the option to include another appointed.
Yeah, legislatively it would be possible to do that, but council would have to give us that steer, because the community has given us the steer that they agree with the proposed structure.
That is correct, but specifically for Waikanae, there were submissions about a second ward councillor. So is it better to have someone who's actually making comments on a specific ward versus someone who doesn't really understand all the ins and outs anyway? And the fact that that representation can be different from a legal perspective.
It is possible to adjust that, yes. Is that what you're asking?
Yes. Yeah. So I suppose the reason, as based on the submissions, specifically for Waikanae, I would like that included in the paper on the 31st.
Sorry, I was doing something else. What does she want included?
So it's around the discrepancy, specifically for the Waikanae Community Board, where only 1 councillor
No,
is
we're not going
appointed.
to include that. I'll move on to Martin.
Can I actually ask why?
So
please,
So,
based on the submissions?
so hang on a minute. What are we going to suggest to the Local Government Commission in terms of representation on the community boards?
Okay, so at present, the initial proposal that we consulted on was to retain the number of community boards, retain the 4 elected members on those community boards, and then retain the same number of councillor appointments, but it would change to, so for example, for Otaki, it could be either the Māori ward councillor or the general ward councillor, and when the new council is elected in the new triennium, the council can then, based on the people around the table, decide which one.
So I'm keen not to have, let's have a quick discussion about this, we've got time. I'm keen not to have community boards overloaded with councillors. I think 1 is enough, and I'd like to bring the Paraparaumu number down to 1.
Okay.
Yeah? Who thinks that's a good idea? Who thinks that's a good idea?
I think it has to be consistent.
I think it's a great idea.
I think the problem is the inconsistency, right? So you don't need more than one councillor on a community board, because the point of a ward councillor on a community board, is to provide communication back to the council. You don't need more than one person to do that. They're not meant to be part of the decision making particularly. Dale's got a comment around that. Hang on.
To make that change, as you suggested, we do have to have a submission. So if we wanted to reduce from 2 to 1, we'd have to have a submission to support that.
Okay. Do we need a submission in order to increase the number?
Yes, we do. It's the same principle. So we've
Okay.
currently got for Waikanai 1. If we wanted to go to 2, we'd have to have a submission to support that.
Okay. Do we have a submission to support that?
No.
Can I quickly discuss it with Al?
Yeah, okay. Let's
We
look
can
at that.
discuss it across
We'll park that for now. We'll look at whether we have a submission to support what you're saying, and we'll tack that onto our discussion when we discuss the macrons, because I don't want to go down that rabbit hole today, all of a sudden. Thank you. Councillor Halliday?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just bear with me a little bit here. In regard, just taking on board what you just said, if you were looking at reducing the councillors at Paraparaumu Community Board, would that need a submission to do that?
That would also need one. I've
Which we
just
don't.
heard from Dale, and I should have known this, that we need a submission to make any changes to the initial proposal. Steffi has just said that she needs to look at that a bit further, because there was a submission around discrepancies. She'd like to take that away, talk to Dale about it, and then we'll bring that back when we have our top-up discussion around this.
Because what I was going to talk about was, you've got there include Māori representation on community boards. Now, the Māori will be a ward councillor. So if you had Māori representation on the Paraparaumu Community Board, you would actually have a discrepancy. You would have 3 councillors on the community board when you're actually only allowed 2, because of the 50% rule.
I think Steffi just answered that, saying it would be one or the other.
Okay, so that's okay. So, well, then is the Māori representative going to be replacing all the other community board, other councillors that are on there as well? Because if you follow that train of thought, then the Māori ward councillor would be replacing the Paikokoriki one, would be replacing the anyone that's got one councillor delegation to it. The Māori ward councillor would be replacing, if you follow that reasoning.
So the way it's currently been structured is that decision will be for council to consider when they set their new governance structure in the new triennium, and that will depend on the people around the room and workload and everything, considering everything to make the best decision at that point.
So the commission itself doesn't make a decision on how the Māori ward councillor fits into community boards.
They could make a more definite determination, but other councils have exactly the structure where they can choose between a general ward and the Māori ward councillor when they set their governance structure.
Choose between them,
Mm-hmm.
one or the other.
Yeah.
And that would be a choice of what, the community board?
It would be the council decision when we set our governance structure.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's gone. I just want to get some clarity around that,
Yeah.
that was all.
Yeah.
Because another option is for potentially the Māori ward representative, because it's the Māori ward, their representation, if they were to be the representative person to Te Whakaminanga or Kapiti, would potentially be the Māori representation for the Māori ward.
That would all be stuff we'd discuss with our governance and
that's right.
delegations
No, I just wanted to
rather
clarify.
than through
that.
this.
Okay, so that's not going to be part of what we do as part of our submission.
No.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
That structure was simply meant to keep the options open for the new council.
Yeah, that provided some useful clarity for me too. Thank you, Councillor Halliday. Councillor Pravanov.
Yeah, thank you. So just following on from Councillor Halliday, so I think earlier on, Steffi did make the comment that the Māori ward councillor could be appointed to a community board, and now she's clarified how that would work. I think it would be really good to have that made quite clear in the paper that's
Yeah,
coming
I agree.
forward.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bede?
This concern maybe doesn't have to change the whole course of the conversation, but I worry that we're setting up a new council to have a massive shit fight right at the start of its triennium by fighting over who's going to sit on what community board.
That won't be anything new.
Yeah, absolutely not going to be the first time. But may I ask a question of Dale? So we needed to have had a submission for around the Waikanae representation to make that decision. I think you're right, Jocelyn. I think there was somebody that submitted on that issue. Could council, in response to that, say, no, we're not going to accept two ward councillors on the Waikanae Community Board. Instead, we're just going to say a blanket rule of only one on all community boards. If there
So
wasn't
could
a
we
submission on
respond to the
that part of it.
Waikanae submission? Yeah, good question.
That, as I said earlier, any changes, it must be as a result of submissions. And we have to have good rationale for that. I think, I just lost my train of thought there. The bullet point that I was going to make, I've lost. I'm sorry. I'll come back to you on that one. Yes.
So the question is, could we hang a change to all the community boards off the submission around the Waikanae Community Board? Even if it doesn't particularly refer to the other community boards. Is that the question, Bede?
Yeah. Like if you say, no, we're not going to allow on the basis that all community boards from now on are only going to have one.
No, it is now.
It is the responsibility of council to determine whether a submission supports the change that you want to make or not. The risk is that if you interpret these submissions as saying that you want to do something and the Commission has a different viewpoint, it just increases the likelihood that the Commission may make a decision that you don't agree with, should it go to them eventually. But we can pour through the submissions and actually...
Okay.
So
Dale?
we do have two submissions, so we do have the basis to make some changes on that.
On both of those community boards? Awesome.
Yes. Well, I have to look at the individual. There's two submissions on that. I'd like to read through those first. Yes.
Yeah, so we'll stick with having this kōrero another time. So can we park any comments around representation from councillors to community boards until that next wee discussion that we're going to have?
Can I just get some clarity on that? Do we need to make that decision by the 31st?
Yes.
So that would have to happen pretty quick.
Yeah, we'll have to squeeze something in.
Couldn't, and
Shouldn't take
taking on
too long.
board what you said, Madam Mayor, about perhaps there being one on all the community boards, which I don't think is an unreasonable idea. Could another option be to have none? Is that an option, or do we have to have some representation?
Hang on.
You've gone out with your initial proposal showing that there is minimum of one and sometimes two. To suddenly go to zero, unless there are submissions to support that, we could not do that. Okay, so again, it comes back to submissions.
I can comment. There are 3 submissions that comment on removing councillors from community boards.
Nigel?
Yeah, just a quick note on that. Yeah, you've got three submissions saying remove councillors from community boards, and you got 2 saying add one apparently. I'm with Dale on this. A submission it has to have a good rationale to support the submission. We can't make representations on the basis of submissions, because you will get all sorts of Looney Tune submissions from time to time. So I don't think just that a submission in itself isn't sufficient to necessarily to take it forward. Now Dale may have a view on that, but the good rationale, I think, definitely applies. I'm of the view, obviously, that less is more as far as councillors and community boards are concerned. One question which Dale may be able to answer: is there an opportunity for council members to swap out? So, for instance, if they're in, I'll use Waikanae because it's the only example where there are 2 councillors, and in the ward where by agreement one councillor could do the first year, one does the second year, or however they might determine to split it. Is that possible? Because I know it was done by a vote of council about who would be the representative. So
Yeah, we just need to bring a paper on our governance and delegations. Is that right, Dale?
Yeah, that is correct. What we're doing here is setting the structure. The detail can come later, whether you want it one for 18 months and the other for 18 months. That's the detail that comes later.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's a good question, Nigel. Okay, we're going to wrap up this discussion now. We've got a couple of mop-ups to do, in 2 mop-ups to do in another briefing, which we're going to squeeze in sometime before the 31st. Until then, thank you to Dale and Ben. Thanks, Steffi and Sarah, who was here supporting. And thanks for a great discussion. And we'll come back at 11:30.
Mm-hmm.